In this video, I'll be sharing with you some basic microphone technique to help you get a really professional sound. Now, your microphone is a really important tool to help you to sing well. And there are a variety of different microphones available, which I'll explain in a little bit. But I've heard so many great singers that have let themselves down with poor microphone technique, which is why I want to get across this information. Now, for those that are techie or without a microphone and they're looking to see what microphones to buy, let me give you a quick example of the types that are available. Now, first of all, here I've got a Shure SM58 microphone. Now, this is a really popular microphone for vocalists and it's been around since the 60s. It gets a really great kind of sound and it's a dynamic microphone. I'll explain a bit more about that in a moment. So this is probably the most popular microphone for vocalists that perform live, the Shure SM58. Now, I used one of these for years, but have since moved over now to something a little bit more modern, which is the one I've got in front of me here, which is a Rode M1 microphone. It's a dynamic microphone. The same as the Shure 58 in that respect, but it's a bit more modern. I like it because it gives a great sound and it's a little bit more robust as well. So when I'm performing live and I might accidentally drop it, which is never good for any microphone, and you should try and avoid that. But it can happen from time to time. It gets little knocks and bumps, and certainly when I'm teaching, my students might sort of bang and clank it. So I like the M1, a great sound. I think it's, in my personal opinion, a little bit stronger than the SM58. And it's a little bit cheaper as well to buy currently. Whether it stays that way or not, I'm not entirely sure. Okay, so that's a dynamic microphone. The other type of microphone that you might see is a condenser microphone. Here's a condenser microphone. This is the Rode NT1. And the real difference between condenser microphones and dynamic microphones is the sensitivity. So a condenser microphone is a lot more sensitive, will pick up a lot more detail in your voice. And so it's very often used for recording because it picks up everything really crystal clear. Not so great when you're on stage performing live because there's lots of noise going on there that you perhaps won't want to have picked up on. A dynamic microphone will pick up quite nicely from one direction, which is just going straight in there, whereas this is a little bit more open. So dynamic generally used for live performances, condenser used for recording booths where there's very little background noise. So there's the types of microphones that you might use, not necessarily those brands or makes, but that gives you a little bit of information. So that's dynamic and condenser. Condenser microphones tend to be a lot more expensive than dynamic. Condenser microphones, you could spend literally thousands of pounds for one microphone, whereas a dynamic, for example here, the SM58 and the Rode M1 here is probably in the region of about 90 Great British pounds at the moment. Okay, so that's just a quick overview of the types of microphone you might be dealing with. You'll have to get a sense of what works best for you in terms of your sound. So it's well worth doing some research if you're looking to buy a microphone online, because obviously you won't want to go out and buy microphones just for the purposes of testing. So you use other people's experiences for that. So let's get into technique. Now, I'm going to explain some of this in some real basic detail for those of you that haven't got much experience with singing or microphones in general. But there's also information here as well for the advanced singer. So if you are an advanced singer, do bear with me whilst I explain some of the bits of basic detail as we go through. Now, the first thing I would recommend for any new singer who's perhaps not used to a microphone is to plug it into your equipment, whether that's your PA system or whether it's just a little amplifier with headphones, and just spend time, not just a short amount of time, spend days just playing with it. Okay, hold it in your hand, put it on a stand, sing into it, make weird noises, because very often new singers get really put off by hearing themselves, and it's a great novelty. And the amount of times I've heard people step up to the microphone in my studio and go, oh, just because it surprises them that their voice is coming back. And it can take a little while to get used to that. So play with it, get used to it, find out what it can do. Okay, now there's a couple of things that you should know with microphone. There's arguments for holding a microphone or having it on a stand. Now, sometimes you're going to have to hold a microphone because there won't be a stand available, or perhaps you want to move around a lot and so you want to hold it in your hand. So please be aware that the body of the microphone can pick up lots of interference and taps and things. So if I take this out now, you can hear already that it's starting to crackle and rattle. Now, this is a fairly loose lead that I've used on purpose to give you an example of what can happen when you're holding a microphone. So make sure you hold it with a firm grip. That way there's no movement on the body of the microphone. Now, I often see singers that keep time with their fingers on the microphone, and that is really a bad habit to get into, because it will pick up, the sound will pick up. If I put this back in the stand for a moment and I show you, if I'm holding that and I'm keeping time as I'm going through, I'm sure you can hear a thud sound as I'm keeping time with my finger. And you'll be surprised that a lot of singers don't actually realize that they're generating that extra noise. So a nice firm grip as you're holding it, and keep the microphone in a position which is probably about that far away from your mouth. Okay, you may have to change that slightly depending on the sound you want, the volume that you want. As I get into further detail in a moment, you'll understand what I mean by that. But generally speaking, about that far away. Now, you'll notice some singers, especially rock singers and musicians with a really loud band, will have the microphone literally right on their lips, and that's because interference from the rest of the noise is not allowing their voice to be heard, so they bring it closer to that. But that's not ideal. If you've got a nice clear space to make a sound, keep a nice distance from it, because it allows you to do more with the microphone and use it as a tool. So that's one of the things then. So hold it here, okay, nice and firmly if you're going to hold it, but even better if you've got it on the stand, you don't have to worry about any of that stuff. Now, in terms of the angle of the microphone, whether to have it angled up like I've got it here or angled down, it's entirely up to you, really. Some people will tell you that you have to hold it up here and angle it downwards. But the problem with that is it can very often mask your face, and as a performer you don't necessarily want to do that. So as long as you can be heard and you can use the microphone as a tool, down is absolutely fine. Now, another thing to be aware of when you're using a microphone is something called sibilance. Now, that's noises from air from your mouth, like for example P's and B's will give you big pushes of air. So if you take your hand and put it in front of your mouth now and do Peter Piper picked a piece of pickled pepper, you'll hear on every P sound air hitting your hand quite hard. Now, if you do that into a microphone, this is what happens. Peter Piper picked a piece of pickled pepper. You can hear the thud, 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 thud as you do that. Now, a way of getting around that is to shape your mouth better, which you should be doing anyway with good vocal technique. So Peter Piper picked a piece of pickled pepper. Now, I'm not thudding because I'm dispersing the air in a different way there. If you can't quite manage that, then some vocalists will angle their mouth slightly to one side of the microphone so the air goes across it rather than directly into it. So Peter Piper picked a piece of pickled pepper. Now, if you've seen a recording studio on TV, they sometimes have these big rings in front of the microphone which are made of material, usually, and that stops that airflow from hitting the microphone. They're called pop shields, and they stop that from happening. But you wouldn't use that on a live performance. So try to get the technique right, holding the microphone or using the space correctly to make sure there's not too much air hitting. Now, a previous singing teacher of mine used to encourage me to actually light a candle and sing at the candle and try to get the flame to move the smallest amount as I was practicing, so I knew that my air wasn't being hit in one direction, which was great for microphone technique. So couple of things there. Get used to the microphone. Play with the microphone, get used to the sounds that the body makes so that you don't cause any unwanted noises, and make sure your airflow is correct. Now, once you've got all of that in order, you'll want to then use the microphone to help you blend into the music, which is what we're going to look at now. So first of all, we're going to talk about volume. Now, volume over the music will alter depending on the style of music you're singing. So I would encourage you, it sounds like a really basic thing to get the level of your voice right, not too loud, not too quiet against the music, but there's a bit of an art to that. So listen to lots of recordings, okay? Find out exactly whereabouts the vocals are within the mix of the sound, how loud or how quiet are they, and turn the volume right down as you listen and then turn it up a bit. So you get that judged across different volumes of the entire track, so you can get an idea of what's good generally. Okay, now a great way, obviously, and it's fairly obvious, hopefully, the closer you get to the microphone, the louder you get, the further back you get, the quieter you get. So you can adjust your, if I use this other microphone here, as you're singing, you can adjust your volumes and play with the sound with distancing of the microphone, okay? So if you're watching performers, you might see them on a long note fade it out by moving the microphone away to give them a little bit of distance and a little bit of reduction in volume there. So it's not all down to the person on the mixing desk behind the scenes. It's the performer's duty really to get used to the volume that they're making with the distance of the microphone. So that's something, again, to get experienced in, and there's nothing really like the experience of doing that. It's not something you can just go, oh, okay, I'll do that now. You have to really play and spend some time singing different types of music and getting used to what that does, okay? Don't be afraid of the microphone. Again, when I've seen new singers, I've seen them kind of holding the microphone completely away from themselves because they're scared of it. Well, that's not going to do any good. A microphone's there to pick up your voice. That's its job. So don't be afraid of the microphone. Okay, now let's get in now to a little bit more advanced technique with the microphone. And this is something really to enable you to get your EQ right with the sound that you have. And by that, I mean to sort out the lower frequencies, so the bass end in your voice, and the higher frequencies, the top end. Now, for example, if you're doing a really energetic, upbeat song, you might find that your vocals are very high anyway, and you'll want a high frequency sound to help you cut through. And high frequency sounds will cut through much better than low frequency sounds. So very loud, edgy music tends to be quite punchy, and you want the high frequency. Whereas if you're doing something a bit more mellow, you'll want those deep bass frequencies to come out. Now, the distance from the microphone will also help you to achieve the sound that you want there. So if I just carry on speaking, and as I get closer to the microphone, you'll hear that there's more bass in my voice. There's more warmth, it's a bit more boomy, and that might be great for a ballad. Whereas if I get further away from the microphone, the bass goes, and I'm left with something which is a little bit more tinny, a little bit more high frequency. So the distance from the microphone will actually create different sounds for you. So again, something to be played with. Now, you might already be thinking, but hang on a second, the distance is for the volume. This is where it gets slightly more complicated, because you will have to adjust both to match each other. Okay, so for example, if you wanted a quiet sound, but you wanted it boomy and bassy, then you would have to reduce your output volume, the volume that you're actually singing at, so you can get close enough to get the bass. So you'd have to mix between the two elements to give you the sound that you wanted. Okay, so again, experiment, play with that, but it's a great tool. And a microphone is definitely an important part of a performance, and you should get used to how to control that and how to use that to your advantage. It's not just about making you louder. It's a tool that you can use to sculpt the way that your voice sounds. Now, there are a few basic techniques for microphone, and a basic bit of information there for microphone. There's plenty of other information available if you want to find out more about dynamic microphones or condenser microphones. You can just type that into Google. There's a whole wealth of information there. Get people's opinions. You'll find that people are very opinionated about what type of microphone is best, and I hope I haven't offended too many professionals by demonstrating the microphones that I have here with me at the moment. But they're a pretty usual range of mics, and I hope that helps anybody who is a beginner. I would certainly advise against popping into your local electronics shop and buying the cheapest microphone you can, because you're not going to be able to get that range and that detail of the sounds that you're able to make, and you're kind of wasting your talent with a cheaper microphone. Now, I hope that information is useful. If you have any questions, please feel free to email, and don't forget to click subscribe to stay up to date with videos as I post them.